What is up, everybody? This is a podcast for the AS level exam biology. It is the transport in animals and plants topic, but only part 1. I suggest that you write notes as you listen through so that you can kind of write it down and let it go all in, otherwise it will just go straight over your head. I do apologise if I pronounce words wrong. I'm just a student and my pronunciation is appalling. Anyway, enjoy. Thank you. Transport in animals and plants. Multicellular organisms require a transport system to take materials from cells to exchange surfaces and from exchange surfaces to cells. Materials also have to be transported between exchange surface and the environment, as well as to different organs in the body. So basically, materials have to be transported to the cells, exchange surfaces, different organs and the environment. A transport system has the following common features: a medium, such as blood, to carry materials, a closed system of vessels that contains the blood and forms a branching network to distribute the body, a pump, e.g. a heart for moving blood within vessels, valves to maintain the flow of direction, a respiratory pigment, which is absent in insects, which increases the volume of oxygen that can be transported. Open and closed systems. Open blood system, e.g. insects. It is pumped at a relatively low pressure from one main, long, dorsal tube-shaped heart running... I'm going to read that again. Open blood system, for example, insects. Blood is pumped at a relatively low pressure from one main, long, dorsal tube-shaped heart running the length of the body. Blood is pumped out of this heart into spaces called hemocoil within the body cavity. Blood bathes tissues directly. Exchange of materials takes place, and there's little control over the direction of circulation. The blood slowly returns to the heart as valves. Blood slowly returns to the heart as valve waves of contraction. Blood slowly returns to heart as the valves, with the help of the valves and waves of contraction of the muscle wall. Once it's returned to the head, the circulatory system starts again. There is no respiratory pigment in insects, as blood of the insect does not transport oxygen. Oxygen is transported directly to the tissues via the trachea. And you should already know that from learning transporting gaseous exchange in animals and plants. And you learn about spiracles, etc. Okay. Closed circulatory systems, for example, mammals. The blood circulates in a continuous system of tubes, the blood vessels. Blood is pumped by a muscular heart at high pressure, resulting in a rapid flow rate. Organs that are not in direct contact with blood, but bathed by tissue fluids seeping out from thinned wall capillaries. The blood contains pigment to carry oxygen. Earthworm is another example that has a closed circulatory system, even though it is vastly smaller than the mammal. It has dorsal and ventral vessels running the length of the body. Vessels are connected by 5... I have no idea how to pronounce this word. Pseudohearts? I'm not sure. Blood moves through vessels by pumping actions of pseudohearts. That's spelled Pseudoherts. Single and double circularity systems. There are 2 types of closed circularity system, depending on whether the blood pumps through the heart once or twice. A single circularity system, for example in fish, the heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the gills. Oxygenated blood is then carried to tissues. Deoxygenated blood then returns to the heart. It goes through the heart once. So it goes from the heart through the afferent arteries to the gill capillaries, where it takes up oxygen, and then it goes through the afferent arteries to the organs, and then to the veins, and back to the heart. Double circularity system, for example, mammals. This is the blood passes through the heart twice in each circuit, once through the left and once through the right. There is the pulmonary circulation, whereby the right side of the heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Oxygenated blood returns to the left side of the heart. And there is a systematic circulation, whereby the left side of the heart pumps oxygenated blood to tissues and deoxygenated blood returns to the right heart. Structure and function of blood vessels. The arteries and the veins are made up of three basic layers. There is the endothelium, which is the innermost layer, which is 1 cell thick. It provides a smooth lining to reduce friction and provide minimum resistance to the flow of the blood. There is the middle layer, which is made up of elastic fibres and smooth muscle. It is thicker in arteries and in veins to accommodate changes in blood flow and pressure as it pumps from the heart. There is finally the outer layer, which are collagen fibres. These are resistant to overstretching. The arteries. These carry blood away from the heart. There is a thick muscular arteries. These carry blood away from the heart. Thick muscular walls. Arteries. These carry blood away from the heart. There is thick muscular walls to withstand high pressure of blood received from the heart. Contraction of the arterial muscle helps to maintain pressure as the blood is transported further from the heart. The arteries branch into smaller vessels called arterioles, which further subdivide into thin-walled capillaries. Veins. These have a larger diameter and have thicker walls as pressure and flow is reduced. They have semilunar valves along their length to ensure flow in one direction. The semilunar valves are not present in arteries apart from the aortic valves. Capillaries. These form a vast network which penetrates all tissues and organs of the body. Blood capillaries collects. Capillaries. These form a vast network which penetrates all the tissues and organs of the body. The blood from the capillaries collects in the... What does that say, me? God, what have I written here? Do you know what? I'm just going to say venules. Oh, God, I don't know. We'll skip that point, sorry. Okay, capillaries are thin-walled, consisting of only endothelium, so their walls are permeable to water and dissolve substances such as glucose. It is the capillaries that exchange materials between the blood and the tissues. They have a small diameter and friction with the walls, so this slows the blood flow. Although the diameter is small, there are many capillaries in the capillary bed, providing a large total cross-sectional area which further reduces blood flow. This low velocity and very thin-walled vessels enhances their ability to exchange materials with the surrounding tissue fluid. We will learn about tissue fluid later. Brace yourselves because it's one heck of a confusing piece of shit. Right. The heart cardiac cycle. The heart. It's said to be myogenic. It's relatively thin-walled collection chamber. There is a thick-walled pumping chamber. It's partitioned into two completely separation of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Pumps are side by side and work together. The cardiac cycle. This describes a sequence of events in one heartbeat. A systole is a contraction, and I like to think of that as systole, if that's how you pronounce it, begins with an S, and S stands for speed, so it's like contraction, and then relaxation is diastole, and I like to think of that as D stands for dead, and obviously when you're dead, you relax. So you alternate between systole and diastole. There are three steps of the cardiac cycle. 1. The atrial style. Sorry, I can't pronounce half these words. 1. The atrial systole. The right ventricle relaxes and the left ventricle relaxes. The tricuspid and the bicuspid valves open as the atria contract. Blood flows into the ventricles. Number 2. The ventricular systole. The atria relax. Right and left ventricles contract together, forcing blood out of the heart into the pulmonary artery and the aorta. Semilunar valves are opened. Tricuspid and bicuspid valves are closed by the rise of ventricular pressure. Pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and the aorta carries oxygenated blood to various parts of the body. Diastole. The ventricles relax. Pressure in the ventricles falls and blood under high pressure in the arteries causes the semilunar valves to shut, preventing blood from going back to the ventricles. Blood from the vena cava and pulmonary veins enter the atria. And then when these three stages, the arterial systole, the ventricular systole and the diastole occur, the cycle repeats and starts again. So describing that from the left side of the heart, the left atrium is relaxed and receives oxygenated blood from the pulmonary vein. When full, the pressure forces open the bicuspid valve between the atrium and the ventricle. Relaxation of the left ventricle draws blood from the left atrium. From the right atrium. The left atrium contracts, pushing the remaining blood into the right ventricle through the valve. With the left atrium relaxed and the bicuspid valve closed, the left ventricle contracts. That is so confusing. That just went right over my head. Right. The strong muscular walls exert a strong pressure and push blood away from the heart through the semilunar valves, through the pulmonary arteries and the aorta. A heartbeat is one complete contraction and relaxation. Both sides of the heart work side by side. Both ventricles contract at the same time. Ventricles contain more muscle than the atria and so generate more pressure to force the blood a greater distance. Left ventricle has a thicker muscular wall as it has to pump all the blood around the body, whereas the right only has to pump it to the lungs. Valves. These are used to prevent unwanted backflow. They are the same design and operate the same way in all different valves, such as the bicuspid and the tricuspid valves, the semilunar valves, and valves in the veins. Pressure changes in the heart. The highest pressure occurs in the aorta/arteries that show a rhythmic rise and fall corresponding to ventricular contraction. Friction with vessel walls causes a progressive drop in pressure. Arterioles have a large total surface area and relatively narrow bore, causing a substantial reduction from aortic pressure. Their pressure depends on whether they are dilated or contracted. The extensive capillary beds have a large cross-sectional area. These beds create an even greater resistance to blood flow. The relationship between pressure and speed as pressure drops further due to leakage of capillaries. The return flow to the heart is non-rhythmic and pressure in the veins is low, The return flow to the heart is non-rhythmic and pressure in the veins is low, but can be increased by the massaging effect of muscle. Control of heartbeat. The cardiac muscle is myogenic. Within the wall, the right atrium is a region of specialized cardiac fibers called the sinoatrial node that acts as a pacemaker. A wave of electrical stimulation arises at this point and then spreads over the two atria, causing them to contract at roughly the same time. The electrical stimulation is prevented from spreading to the ventricles by a thin layer of connective tissue. This acts as a layer of insulation. It is important that the muscles and the ventricles do not start to contract until atrium have finished. Stimulation reaches AVN, the atrioventricular node, which lies between the two atria and passes on the excitation to specialized tissues in the ventricles. From the AVN, the excitation passes down the bundle of His to the apex. The bundle branches into the Purkinje fibers in the ventricle walls, which carry the wave of excitation upwards through the ventricle muscle. The impulses cause cardiac muscle in each ventricle to contract simultaneously from the apex upwards. This ensures that the ventricles are empty completely. Okay, so to summarise that into a short list of one words is the sinoatrial node which contract the atria. Then the connective tissue prevents the stimulation to go any further. The atrioventricular node sends the stimulation down the bundle of His to the apex, and the apex sends the stimulation up the Purkinje fibers, up the ventricles. Blood. This is made up of 45% of cells and 55% fluid plasma. Red blood cells. They contain a pigment called hemoglobin, and the main function is to transport oxygen from lungs to respiring tissues. Red blood cells are unusual in two ways. Number 1. They are a biconcave shape. This increases surface area and enables oxygen to diffuse quickly into and out of the cell. 2. There is no nucleus. This means there is more room for hemoglobin, maximising the oxygen that can be carried by each cell. White blood cells, also known as leukocytes. Leucocytes. These are larger, possess a nucleus and a spherical or irregular shape. There are two main groups of white blood cells. Number 1, the granulocytes. They are phagocytic, have a granular cytoplasm, a lobe nuclei, and engulf bacteria. The second group of white blood cells are the agranulocytes. They produce antibodies and antitoxins, have a clear cytoplasm and a spherical nuclei. Plasma. This is made up of 90% water, soluble food molecules, waste products, hormones, plasma proteins, mineral ions, and vitamins. Plasma transports carbon dioxide, digested food products, hormones, plasma proteins, fibrinogen, I don't know how that's spelled, antibodies. Plasma also distributes heat. Transport of oxygen. To be efficient at transporting oxygen, hemoglobin needs to be readily associated with oxygen at the lungs, readily dissociated from oxygen at requiring tissues such as muscle. Hemoglobin is a remarkable molecule able to change its affinity for oxygen in the presence of CO2 by changing its shape. The altered shape binds more loosely with oxygen and releases it. At low concentrations of oxygen, it is difficult for hemoglobin to absorb oxygen. At high pressures of oxygen, the percentage saturation of hemoglobin is high. A small decrease in partial pressure of oxygen leads to a lot of oxygen being dissociated from hemoglobin. Red blood cells lead oxygen into the lungs where the partial pressure is high and hemoglobin becomes saturated with oxygen. The cells carry oxygen as oxyhemoglobin to respiring tissues such as the muscle, where partial pressure is low. Oxyhemoglobin unloads oxygen. The two important factors of the dissociation curve is that the more the dissociation curve is to the left, the more readily it picks up oxygen, but the less readily it releases it. The more the dissociation curve is to the right, the less readily it picks up oxygen, but the more readily it releases it. The effect of carbon dioxide concentration. If there is a high partial pressure of CO2, the dissociation curve moves to the right. This is a phenomenon known as the Bohr effect. When oxygen reaches respiring tissues such as the muscle, the high partial pressure of carbon dioxide there enables hemoglobin to unload oxygen more easily. In summary, when the respiratory pigment hemoglobin is exposed to a gradual increase in oxygen, tension absorbs oxygen rapidly at first, but then more slowly as the tension continues to rise. The relationship is the oxygen dissociation curve. The release of oxygen from hemoglobin is facilitated by the presence of carbon dioxide. When the partial pressure of oxygen, such as in the lung capillaries, is high, oxygen combines with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. When the partial pressure of oxygen is low, as found in the respiring tissues, then the oxygen dissociates from hemoglobin. When the partial pressure of CO2 is high, hemoglobin is less efficient at associating with oxygen and more efficient at releasing it. The dissociation curve of fetal hemoglobin. Blood in the fetus flows closely with the mother's but rarely mixes. To enable the fetal hemoglobin to absorb oxygen from the maternal hemoglobin in the placenta, the fetus has a hemoglobin that differs. Hemoglobin that differs. It differs in 2 of the 4 polypeptide chains. This structural difference makes the fetal hemoglobin dissociation curve shift to the left. This means that it combines more loosely with oxygen and will pick up oxygen more readily. It has a greater affinity to oxygen. Transport of oxygen in other animals. Many organisms have different forms of hemoglobin related to the habitat in which they live. Some animals have become adapted to low levels of oxygen. For example, the lugworm. It has a low metabolic rate and lives in the sand in the sea shore. There is seawater pumped through its burrow, giving it a limited amount of dissolved oxygen. Hemoglobin dissociation curve is to the left for a lugworm, so it has a greater affinity for oxygen and will pick it out more readily. Another example is the llama. The llama lives in an area of increased altitude and drop in pressure. Partial pressure of oxygen is low in the atmosphere at a high altitude. This leads to hemoglobin, which will combine more readily with oxygen. The dissociation curve is again to the left. Myoglobin. It is far more stable than hemoglobin. It will not release oxygen unless the partial pressure of oxygen is extremely low. Myoglobin dissociation curve is far to the left. At each partial pressure of oxygen, myoglobin has a far higher percentage of oxygen saturation than hemoglobin. When oxygen partial pressure becomes very low, such as in exercising, the oxymyoglobin unloads its oxygen. The oxygen in the oxymyoglobin acts as a reserve and is only used when there is practically zero oxygen demand. Transport of carbon dioxide in the body. Carbon dioxide is transported in the blood cells and plasma in three ways. Number 1, in a solution in the plasma. Number 2, as hydrogen carbonate. Number 3, in combination with hemoglobin to form carbaminohemoglobin. Some carbon dioxide is transported in the red blood cells, but most is converted in the red blood cells to hydrogen carbonate, which dissolves in the plasma. The chloride shift describes the process in which stuff moves around in the blood. Number 1. Carbon dioxide diffuses into the red blood cells and combines with water to form carbonic acid. The reaction is catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic acid dissociates, which means split up, into H+ and HCO3-. The HCO3- ions diffuse out of the red blood cells into the plasma, where they combine with sodium plus ions. These have been formed by the dissociation of sodium chloride to form sodium hydrogen carbonate. The H+ ions provide the condition for the oxyhemoglobin to dissociate with oxygen and hemoglobin. H+ ions are buffered by their combination with hemoglobin and formation of hemoglobinic acid. Oxygen diffuses out of the red blood cells into the tissues. Chloride ions diffuse in. These were formed earlier on from the dissociation of sodium chloride. They diffuse into the red blood cells to balance the movement of negatively charged ions. It is by this means that the electrochemical neutralness of the red blood cell is contained. Intercellular fluid. Capillaries are the state of exchange between the blood and the cells of the body. They are well adapted to allow the exchange of materials between blood and cells. They have thin, permeable walls, large surface area for exchange of materials. Blood flows slowly through the capillaries, allowing time for exchange of materials. The blood contains fluid plasma that carries the blood cells, carries dissolved minerals, and carries large molecules, such as plasma proteins. Blood is contained in a closed system, but fluid from the plasma escapes through the walls of the capillaries. The fluid is called tissue fluid, and this bathes the cells, supplies cells with glucose, supplies cells with amino acids, supplies cells with fatty acids, salts, oxygen. It also removes waste material from the cells. The factors that are responsible for the movement of solutes and water into and out of the capillaries are blood pressure and diffusion. When blood reaches the arteriolar end of a capillary, it is under pressure because of the pumping action of the heart and the resistance to blood flow of the capillaries. This hydrostatic pressure forces the fluid part of the blood through the